This morning we're on the third forum, which is the safety, human element and traffic management issue. We're back on track, so to speak. Yesterday we were in April, but now we're in May, because somebody decided to blow up Brussels Airport and put a stop to our forum. So welcome to the third forum of Motorways of the Seas. Today's meeting, as I said, will deal with the issue of traffic management and human element, which is the third major point of the detailed implementation plan. I would like you to consider what priorities any future MoS work programme should support in order to contribute to maritime safety, and there's many topics at stake. Now I won't repeat what I said yesterday because most of you were here, and those of you who weren't here, it's what I've said before about the general motorways of the sea. So I'll concentrate more on the human element this morning. The human element aspect has to be mentioned in anything to do with maritime. Setting training standards for seafarers is of utmost importance. Multimodal freight transport requires an integrated vision of human resources and responsibilities at different levels. A special attention should be given to all aspects of training required for LNG, for example, safe bunkering operations and safe use of LNG in particular. Sea traffic management is another issue with a strong element of safety and efficiency. How to manage traffic flows, how to assure smooth integration of shipping and the logistics chain, something we discussed yesterday, how to respond quickly in the case of adverse events. Now the last SEF call in 2014 and the ongoing one of 2015 paid attention to the issue of safety, traffic management and human element. Priority was given to projects addressing maritime ICT systems, services addressing safety and security, traffic management, safety of port handling operations, dredging, ice breaking, optimization process relating to traffic management and electronic reporting systems. Studies contributing to the promotion and the development of a viable concept at a regional or European level were also welcome. One could mention ongoing projects, Mona Lisa 2 for instance, which define key performance indicators for 4 SDM voyage management services, traffic flow management services, port collaborative decisions making and the establishment of a common interoperable information environment and structure. Similar to yesterday's meeting, we want to hear your ideas, concerns, suggestions on how a future MoS could contribute to safer and more efficient transport, and in what directions we shall return. Shall we support actions funding innovative digital solutions for safety and traffic management, or invest more in adequate training schemes for seafarers? These are some of the questions we need you to give your contributions to. Could MoS be of added value in tackling irregular migration? How could the MoS programme continue to address global security challenges in the maritime sector? And what is the role of MoS in the whole context of digitalisation of the maritime sector? Safety at sea we take very seriously indeed, and with the increase in cruise traffic and the increase in size of cruise vessels, we also want to look at emergency contingencies in various ports and what we are about to do to ensure that everything runs as safely as possible. Now, with that opening, I will now pass the baton to Lord John Prescott, who was the Deputy Prime Minister of the UK, but a former seaman, and so knows these things very close at heart, and who for very many years has campaigned with regards to safety at sea. So, John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning. Perhaps I should say at the beginning, I've not been promoted to the executive by sitting up here, but my experience with anybody sitting behind the presentation there, you only saw their hair. I like to see the eyes of the people I'm talking to, so they promoted me here to sit up here. Secondly, can I say that I'm delighted to be here with Brian, who we shared many years in politics, including the European Parliament, and Jose as well, who was a skipper at sea. I was only a steward then. Is that all right? So I'll keep proper respect to yourself. So I'm delighted to be. It's a special day to me. I have attended now 3 of these meetings. This is the 3rd one. And as someone who has spent for something like 50 odd years plus, nearly 60 years actually, campaigning for safety at sea. So to be here at a meeting that is talking about the issues I spent most of my life campaigning for, both as a seaman, usually in strikes, also as a Labour Member of Parliament for 40 years, and as a Deputy Prime Minister with the legislation and responsibility for environment and shipping. So to come here today and to see this programme, safety, human element and traffic management, that is quite remarkable, and quite pleasing. And I hope I can apologise for leaving early, because I'm going back to take part in the debate on the referendum. And there couldn't be, and I'll be voting to stay in, but basically there couldn't be a better project than you've got here, because I have spent all my time trying to convince nations to actually deal with safety, when what we've got here is an entirely new development that's moved on from nations onto the UN and IMO, and now Europe is now taking the responsibility not only about its own ships but access to the ports that we have some accountability for, which is a real measure of change. And so to be here to hear it being talked about in this way, putting those 3 pillars together, the environment, the employment, all these things, are absolutely critical. So it couldn't be a better project for me to say, well, to the advantage of seafarers and safety, actually being in Europe is a stronger position than just arguing the national case, as I spent most of my time doing. So I'm delighted to be here and playing a part. The other one that is relevant here, I negotiated the Kyoto Agreement when I was the Deputy Prime Minister for the Environment. And you have environment right at the heart of what we're talking about. It's not just safety and security, it's about the environment, whether we're polluting our world. And basically, we now have to see what we're doing here, and it's come out in the day, what do we do about reducing carbon? That is the issue, low carbon economies, and shipping has a role to play in that, and therefore those things, I think, is wonderful to be here today, to actually make a contribution to it. I have made a number of contributions in the 3, and the first one we did in Liverpool was to point out, which I think came out here, you forgot about the north of England. You know, the Liverpool guy was talking about big superport in Liverpool. There's a big superport in Hull, and you're connecting to Ireland. And the global world is changing now, where all the traffic, like the container improvements in Liverpool, are coming over to there, over to the biggest consumer market in the world, which is Europe. So this is a global traffic, but you haven't got it on your system. I mean, got to carry some blame. If I look at what that map every time, everything goes through Dover. With no disrespect to our Dover guy, he's got so many congestions, you need to pour money into him to increase and reduce the congestion. Perhaps we should look at other routes. Keep them both, it's essential down there. But if you want a northern route, connecting 2 superports, connecting island nations like Ireland, the UK, and then onto the Baltic. I heard the colleagues from Norway, Sweden, and the Baltic areas who were left out of this. That's part of the northern route, and everybody gaily talks about going across the North Pole, etc. This is a route that has to be in. And I was delighted when Yossi said, well, if you've got a little village, it's a bit more than a little village actually, Yossi, but you know what I mean, that we need to get onto them and open up this northern route. It is connecting more than one country. It is a route that's going north. It's a north-south one. It's a traditional route. We in the Humber used to always have trading with the Baltics until the revolutions later. And it's now opening again. So the first point I wanted to make is that, Josie, I hope you'll take into account, I'll certainly be telling our Minister and my colleague from the Department of Transport there, to tell your mate, the Minister, that we want this northern route open. We want it on your map, and that's quite important, right? So I wanted to make my own little thing about the north, because it's quite important to us to make that point. But what's happening here today, which is more important, I had to campaign against nation states. You know, we always used to say there'd be a standard, and then we got the flags of convenience that we used to campaign against. Nation states that sell their flags and reduce the standards, both of the quality of the ships and the crews. And then when the tankers started colliding, sinking, we got concerned about the pollution of oil. We didn't get too concerned about the pollution of the blood of the seafarers who died in that case. That got us very angry. But it was only limited to national influence in that sense. Now we moved then to the UN, and the UN through MO then brought in the standards of improving the qualities on the ships, about the manning and the standards, all right, putting a universal application to the safety. But what happened then? Those nations that just want to sell their flag, and there's enough of them quite frankly, decided that, you know, we don't have to do that, come and join us, you don't have the same standards in ships or crews. So the UN one had a great problem in the universality of the implication, because they sold their flag and their responsibility to improve that safety. Now that was the limitation, if you like, even on the UN. And the UN now and IMO have now brought out MARPOL on environment. Now actually saying we're as concerned about the seas as the ships that are on them. We are polluting our seas. We are threatening our planet. And basically, the UN moved in through the MARPOL and laid down emission areas that ships could only go in if under certain technology, that they were designated emission areas. There would be a monitoring and those things, and the improvements of the water, etc. All those that you're aware of and are pointed out in your document. So my point that I want to make is, it is about monitoring, it is about accountability, and how you determine the priorities within that. What's beautiful about the motorways of the sea is it's now decided that Europe of all the nations now that we have it, will take an action, not just an action to support it in the UN, now prepared to use its treaty obligations, now prepared to use its legislative framework to lay down what we think are essential standards. And it's inevitable, by the way, that if you do that, you'll be wanting to say those ships that don't observe it, perhaps might not be allowed into your port areas. We are starting something which in the world is a major step. It's a European continent, and that's where the world is today anyway. It's concerned by big groups, big continents, big powers. And that's one of the reasons why I support actually staying within the community. We're part of that, and that's what this is about. So to that extent, I think that's the major thing I take from our discussions. But the other one that I would take from it, basically, in improving this, is to look at exactly what we can do. Now, at the old meeting, it was in Liverpool, wasn't it, at that first one, I proposed there that we are already beginning to link the estuaries of the Mersey and the Humber, right across, connecting to Ireland, etc. And we said, what if you've got 400 ports in this system, what if we took the estuaries and implemented what we think are the policies on an estuarial basis? And if you look at the northern route, whether it's into the Baltic or not, they're extremely concerned about environment. And so a few years ago, we produced this document called the Economics, which I mentioned, Economics of Low Carbon Cities. We have now decided in these two estuaries on the Mersey and Humber to look at how we can reduce low carbon. If we can then make our contribution as a shipping and a maritime areas to reducing the carbon levels is what Paris agreed. When I negotiated the Kyoto one in 1997, it finished up in Paris. The science is now accepted. We know from our own industries it's having an effect. So shouldn't we have a look at an estuarial development, that we look in the estuaries? There's 400 ports, I think, that are serviced under this agreement. Look at the estuaries. So what are we doing in the Humber? First of all, we're setting up the environment plan. We're already measuring it and doing it. And the Humber is one of the biggest of the renewable energy bases now through Siemens, one of the biggest in the world. It's now growing in our estuary. So to that extent, there's the environment. We've looked at how we can connect education and nautical education. We do need more skills. It's not just simply having seamen who come from another country, they're cheap, but don't have the skills, because we face the consequences unless we make that. So we're looking at combining our colleges into this kind of nautical area. We're now applying, obviously, dealing with a management thing to the management of the Humber now. We're looking at how we put in new institutions, which we're now doing, to get a better management system. So whether it's in the quality of the ships, the scrubbing that you talk about there, each estuary could develop. And why it's important to do these things and what we're putting together in that area, it's important because I think what you will now find that the European community will be asked after the Paris Agreement, here is your target for reducing carbon. They're going to ask us in 12, 18 months, what are the policies you are pursuing to do that? They're not going to wait till 2020. And I think what you've got here is a project they'll be able to show with its environmental consequences, as well as the safety of ships, the quality of water, etc., can be done. And you can do it within a tighter framework. If you do it in estuary, if we sit here and talk of all Europe's one thing, we need to come down. And that's what we discovered with Kyoto. It's all right having international agreements, but unless you get it right at the bottom level, you've got nothing. And this is one of these areas now that Europe will be asked, and I'm sure Josie and the staff here will be looking at what our contribution out of shipping, which you've gone ahead, probably in advance of any other sector in the world, to look at what our contribution should be. So I'm actually saying, and we're working hard, Brian, to look at how that could be an estuarial contribution, a model we're trying to develop, which has the environment, has the safety, has the infrastructure, has the training, and look how it applies in our area. Manage the ships that come in, look at what the standards are, say what the standards we wish to. Monitoring is the critical factor in most of these areas. So, sorry I've gone on, but I get quite excited to come here after, 60 years campaigning, to sit in a room like this. Can I express my appreciation among seafarers, and I don't mean from Britain, I'm from around the world, because the many seafarers that died, and the tragedy of the boat people now, seamen have died in their thousands simply because we didn't get the standards right, we didn't get the quality on the ships, we looked the other way, took a few bob without enforcing it. You're now moving back accountability, monitoring. That's what this is doing. That's what's exciting, and I'm delighted to be here to play a part in it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, John. And now we've got David Kerr, who is SA on capacity and operations in Malta. We went to Malta and had a very good visit to Malta, and a fast visit to Malta. Valletta to Masaloxox in about 3 minutes with police outriders. It was the one time that I experienced, John, where a deputy prime minister goes through when he gets in an official car and he's taken to a meeting. You know, it was very good. So, David.
Thanks, Brian. First of all, for those who do not know me, my name is David Kerr. I am the Maritime Attaché at the Permanent Representation of Malta. Based in Brussels, I am the head of unit for transport, telecoms and energy, and mainly follow maritime transport, including integrated maritime policy. First of all, Brian, I would like to thank you for the invitation, and I'm happy to be here now to be part of discussion of the forum, following that I had been fortunate enough to actually negotiate the 10T guidelines. And also I would like to commend the fact that Motorways obviously has focused on current and future challenges in order not only to strengthen EU competitiveness, but also in terms of environmental and safety aspect. And now today, obviously, we are looking into other avenues such as migration and the cyber security. Obviously, we all have to take into consideration what is mandated within the 10T guidelines, but such initiatives are for us extremely important and beneficial for obvious reasons. And for this, Malta encourage such an approach. The idea, the scope of my intervention is basically, obviously, not to get into the political issues aspects of search and rescue. We all know search and rescue. We all know that this is ongoing discussion. This is an area of member state competence. But the idea of my intervention here is to give our views, our ideas, to instigate debate, to identify possible future projects. One point that I would like to point out, and that we need obviously to keep into consideration during the discussion, taking a point within the discussion paper, when we're talking about migration, it seems that we're focusing only on the security challenges, but we have to keep also in mind the humanitarian aspect throughout the whole process of picking up new ideas and new projects. As we all know, that search and rescue, the priority is at first is saving life at sea, and then we look into the international security. Now, prior to looking into and addressing the challenges and also identifying projects, I have outlined 3 overarching principles that we need to keep in mind throughout the discussion. Basically, the first overarching principle is that we need to use existing structures, both legally and procedurally. And also we need to ensure that there is a coherence with existing projects in this field. We know that there are projects and initiatives such as the Common Information Sharing Environment and also the Integrated Maritime Services being organized and under the responsibility of MoS. So we all need to ensure there is coherence in any future projects. The second overarching overarching principle, we need to always keep in mind that although the aim is to strengthen and fortify the search and rescue operations within member states, we have to keep in mind that this does not solve the problem of migration. So my plea is that any contribution through Motorways of the Sea program, whenever and obviously if possible, should contribute directly or indirectly to the root cause of this issue, of the issue of migration. Maybe we could trickle down benefits towards third states in terms of migratory aspects. Particularly, obviously, the aim is to create a level of stability, and coming from Malta, particularly with the Mediterranean Sea basin, I mean, we are playing for stability within that region. So as a let's say, an overarching principle, we need to keep this in mind. The third and final principle is that projects, any future projects, need to dovetail and complement existing policies and the current legislation being discussed under the migration package. We have no doubt that Motorways of the Sea can contribute with regards to migration, particularly in terms of preparedness. Obviously, we need to be a little bit creative here when we look into future projects, but we are seeing more in terms of preparedness when it comes to search and rescue. We are all aware that the current scenario when it comes to migration has created obviously an intolerable strain on both national services and including merchant ships. When we look at the upcoming legislation when it's addressing migration, the package itself is based on sharing of information, identifying trends and possible threats, including training. So if we had to look at the final outcome, obviously we are awaiting a final outcome because there is negotiation with Parliament when it comes to this package, but there I think if we are creative enough, we can pinpoint projects in relation to build up on, let's say, the new legal obligation member states would have in terms of sharing of information. Another example when it comes to search and rescue is the challenges being faced by a number of merchant ships when they are involved in the actual search and rescue exercises. Here, obviously, I would like to acknowledge the sterling job being done by a number of seafarers, but obviously they are facing scenarios of safety, security, and economical challenges. So the International Maritime Organization has established a number of guidelines to address these situations, and why not look upon the possibility of establishing an online train-the-trainer programs for such situations in order to have seafarers prepared in terms of these situations. Obviously, we do not have to overshadow the day-to-day running of search and rescue. Migration is part of the whole exercise. I mean, we have to also look in order to look into the possibility of, let's say, kicking up further the level of safety when it comes to handling the safe and secure cruise line and passenger sector. We all are aware that the cruise liner industry is growing at a very, very fast rate. This has been acknowledged by the European Union under the Blue Growth Agenda. And we are fully aware that the industry has always done its utmost to provide high level standards. But on the other hand, ships will continue to push the limit of what is safely possible done at sea. So we're seeing larger ships carrying larger amounts of passengers, and here we should focus on the preparedness of the coastal state to ensure such support for search and rescue authorities. I mean, we could investigate the possibility of looking into projects and studies related to contingency planning, actual exercising being carried out within specific regions, taking what has been done to the next level in terms of search and rescue. Just a few words with respect to cybersecurity. I mean, we have to, if we are going to identify projects vis-a-vis in terms of cybersecurity, we need to look at three aspects. Are we looking at the short-term perspective, medium-term perspective, and long-term perspective? If we look at the short-term perspectives, solutions could be much simpler, such as creating awareness of cybersecurity or identifying threats, including, once again, contingency planning. If we look into the medium-term aspects of cybersecurity, we are looking then into establishing, let's say, international standards with regards to this issue. While long-term solution is actually developing the hardware. So when we're talking about cybersecurity, we have to identify which three areas we should focus. And just a final word, and I would like to take this opportunity just to give you a glimpse of what will be happening under the Maltese presidency coming next year in relation to what is being discussed here. We've got, as priority areas will be Mediterranean migration and maritime. So obviously all this dovetails nicely into what is being discussed. We will be focusing on the digitalization of maritime services. And under the framework of the Integrated Maritime Policy, the idea is to establish a West Med Sea Basin strategy, which is at the end of the day a platform for cooperation with member states and their states. It's a platform for exchange of information, and also we could see this platform to promote motorways of the sea related projects to ensure coherence within the region. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We stick with the Malta theme, although it's a different organisation. Mario Mifsud is the head of unit in charge of visits and inspections and the human element at EMSA, and he is Maltese. That's purely coincidental. So, Mario, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brian, and good morning, everybody. Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everybody. I wish to thank Brian and the organizers of this forum for their kind invitation to address you. As Brian said, my name is Mario Mifsud. The fact that I'm Maltese is totally coincidental in this setting. I'm head of unit for B1, head of unit B1, visits and inspections, within the EMSA Department for Safety and Standards. My unit, apart from being responsible for the coordination and conduct of visits to member states to monitor implementation of the maritime acquis, it also hosts the technical business unit responsible for standards for seafarers, particularly in relation to training and education of seafarers serving on board European ships. Therefore, in the next few minutes, within the context of the human element aspect of today's theme, I will be touching briefly upon different aspects of the human element, reflecting upon EMSA's contribution to strengthening these aspects. As we all know, efficient maritime transport that complies with international safety legislation requires qualified human resources. Let's keep in mind that since the 1980s, several sources have noted that a large percentage of maritime accidents are caused by human error. It is therefore imperative that vessels are crewed by seafarers educated and trained in accordance with standards established at international level and, in the case of European tonnage, also with EU legislation. Furthermore, organizations in the maritime sector need to be managed by people who are aware of the high number of legislative requirements in the sector, and also of the challenges of implementing and enforcing them. EMSA has been given different tasks that contribute to the strengthening of the human element in maritime transport, reducing human error, and in this way improving maritime safety. As most of you may be aware, EMSA was established in 2003, and since its inception it has been assigned tasks that touch upon the human element, and therefore can help develop more qualified human resources in European, and hopefully global, maritime transport. The EMSA task which could possibly be considered as core in this respect is that related to monitoring the implementation of requirements established by the STCW Convention and by Directive 2008-106 on the minimum level of training of seafarers. The STCW Convention, adopted originally in '78 and amended several times, governs rather prescriptively its parties' obligations when they allow other states' certified officers on board their ships. In fact, it requires that as part of the related process to recognize the other state systems of seafarer education, training and certification, parties need to conduct an evaluation of such other state systems. At EU level, the convention was transposed, as I said, in Directive 2008-106, by virtue of which, therefore, the EU member states can endorse certificates issued by non-EU member states' administrations only after such evaluation is successfully concluded. This last consideration acquires more relevance given that many EU-registered ships are often crewed by seafarers who are not nationals of EU member states. This fact needed to be taken into account when the EU had to determine how to best ensure that crew members on board EU member state registered ships were appropriately educated and trained. In this respect, EMSA has been given two tasks: visits to member states and inspections of non-EU countries. These tasks were initiated in 2005, and to date, EMSA has already completed 99 visits and inspections to 77 countries worldwide, which include all the EU member states, Norway and Iceland, and 47 non-EU countries. Based on the requirements established in the EU directive, maritime administrations and education and training establishments in these 77 countries have now to be visited and inspected regularly. The scope of this activity is estimated to cover more than 90% of ships officers operating in EU waters, as well as all others operating on EU-registered ships around the world. Improvements in the education and training systems of all these countries have been noticeable, in fact, as a result of this activity. Our staff members use a common methodology for these inspections and visits, irrespective of the country and the appointed team. And this allows us to produce reports that can be easily assessed by the European Commission and by the state in question. At the same time, it enables horizontal comparability and analysis, and meaningful sharing of findings and identified best practices. Considering how also it is important to keep improving the legislative framework governing this activity, findings from EMSA reporting and analysis also help European and international legislators to identify areas for further improvement in legislation in order to maximize its effectiveness in enhancing maritime safety. Apart from this inspection activity, other EMSA tasks also have links to human element. Through technical support of the European Commission and Member States, different EMSA units cover aspects like the implementation of the ISM code by maritime administrations, investigation of maritime accidents, port state control, as well as training of maritime administration staff. All in all, we look at these past years with satisfaction at the role that EMSA has played in reinforcing the human element aspects of maritime safety. Nevertheless, more challenges lie ahead, and it is not a case of literally sitting on our laurels. And these challenges should not be underestimated. A number of legislative pieces might possibly provide inspiration in this respect. The STCW Convention is a prime example, I would say. It is expected to be further amended in order to keep it updated with technological developments in shipping that require even more specialized human resources. One can also mention the ILO Maritime Labour Convention, which establishes a series of requirements to ensure appropriate working and living conditions for seafarers. Those not familiar with the sector may not perceive the MLC as crucial in terms of maritime safety, but this is far from the truth. Seafarers enjoying proper living and working conditions are less prone to incidences of fatigue and resultant human error. Moreover, with better rest periods and better conditions on board, they feel more motivated and more proactive in their work. Data shows that fatigue is more likely to happen in short voyages and on board vessels which have fewer crew members, a combination which could arguably be expected with more incidents in regional short sea shipping. For the time being, within the context of European waters, EMSA's task is limited to its monitoring of the Port State Control Directive implementation. This covers Member States' Port State Control Inspectors' obligation to ensure that the working and living conditions on board ships visiting their ports are in line with MLC requirements. However, we should not be surprised if in the short term other requirements established in the Convention may also be subject to EMSA visits and inspections regime. One could also mention the STCWF Convention, a very relevant instrument that has been adopted by only a few EU member states and as yet has no related EU legal equivalent. Nevertheless, the number of accidents in the fishing industry is high, even in EU waters. Apart from the intrinsic risk element in this activity, one needs to consider that fishing vessels often operate in areas that are busy with commercial shipping. Moreover, just like all other shipping activities, fishing industry casualties are also characterized by frequent human error. It can therefore be anticipated that the STCWF will in future receive more attention by the European legislator. When EU legislation is adopted, EMSA may face another challenge to ensure that even in the EU fishing industry and on board EU fishing vessels, human resources are duly trained and qualified. These are just a few examples of what could be done by EMSA in the area of human element. And this is because the importance of human element in improving maritime safety cannot ever be overestimated. EMSA has been given a series of tasks that have as their ultimate goal the improvement of maritime safety, ensuring in this way that the EU maritime industry and EU waters are safer. But this can only be achieved if those who crew the vessels and those who manage and control them from shore are duly qualified. With the STCW inspections and the training of maritime administrators, port state control officers, and other specialists being covered by EMSA's current remit, the agency plays a relevant part in ensuring that the human element is addressed through better educated seafarers